Thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar, How to Drive Sales Productivity and Optimization, featuring Barry Traylor, Chief Research Officer at CSO Insights, and Joe Fooster, Global Head of CX Go-to-Market at Oracle. Please feel free to type in any questions you may have during the presentation in the available box, and we'll be sure to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. First to present today will be Barry Traylor, who leads CSO Insights as the Chief Research Officer. He is an expert in sales effectiveness research and has more than 30 years of professional selling experience. Barry will share with us his latest research findings from the CSO Insights 2016 Sales Performance Optimization Study. Following Barry, we'll have Joe Fooster from Oracle. But to get started, let's pass it over to Barry to kick off today's webinar.
Well, thanks, Johanna, and thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'm excited to be here and share a few ideas and some of the data from our latest research, and start by introducing this notion of 3 M's that I'm going to start with: management maturity model, and I know Joe's got 3 other M's he wants to talk to in the second part of this webinar. When we talk about management maturity, here's a conceptual representation, maybe a simplified version of what we're talking about here, with increasing level of relationship on the vertical axis and increasing level of process maturity on the horizontal axis. And what we're showing here is that as each of those increase, so goes rep productivity and performance, which of course is what everybody's interested in. Now, what we've discovered over the years is that in many respects, people, I think, are too casual or assume too much in terms of what process and relationship actually means. And so a number of years ago, nearly a decade ago, we defined both levels of sales process and relationship. So to jump right into it, in terms of process, level 1, which we've labeled random, basically everyone's doing their own thing. If you have 25 sales reps, you've got 26 sales processes. What each of them does, plus what management thinks they should be doing. And what a lot of times people will say at level 1 is, we hire good people and we get out of their way. And that may sound good, but in our view, and certainly the data supports this, it's a really benign neglect. Level 2, informal sales process. There is a sales process that's been documented and adopted. Reps are exposed to it. They're expected to use it, but that use is not monitored. It's not reinforced. It's not enforced. Level 3, formal process implementation, is just the opposite. There is a sales process that's been adopted. Reps' use of it is inspected. It's monitored. It's reinforced. It's enforced. And level 3 companies tend to be very good at reacting to change in their environment. Now, there's one thing wrong with what I just said, and that is they're reacting to change, which brings us to level 4. Dynamic sales process companies have all those things that level 3 companies have, plus they're constantly running the numbers, what one CSO described as running the trap lines. So they're always asking, what's changed, period over period? Rep versus rep, region versus region, product versus product, us against specific competitors, and so on. And they're constantly trying to sense any movement that will telegraph change, as opposed to them needing to react to change. And of course, the larger the company, the more important that is, because as you become less nimble, it takes longer to move, and so on. Getting ahead of the game becomes that much more important. At the same time, I think a lot of bad behavior has gone down in the name of relationship selling. The old line used to be cruising, boozing, and schmoozing. And, that might have been true a decade ago, maybe 2 decades ago, but it's certainly not true today. Today, customers want to know, what do you know about me? What do you know about our business? What do you know about, our competitors and our industry? So it's a much more demanding, much higher level of expectation about what sellers are bringing to the party. Again, we've framed these up. Level 1, approved vendors. The salespeople have clear understanding of their products and services and what their offerings are. Level 2, preferred suppliers. They have that plus some track record of delivery, keeping promises, delivering the products and services and generally have increased number of contacts in the accounts that they call on. Now, a thing that should be said about approved vendors is they have quality goods and services. I mean, if that's sort of the baseline. If you don't have solid products and services today, you aren't even in the game. You're not even invited. Preferred suppliers, again, have a track record of delivery. Another level up, level 3, solutions consultant. A lot of times you'll hear people give voice to what is really a complaint. We're being used for free consulting here. That's not good, but the fact that you're being viewed as a value-added resource, as someone who can consult, who has an informed opinion about their business, about the customer and the customer's customer, all of that is goodness, and it really means that you're being perceived by the buyer at a higher level. So solutions consultants not only understand their solutions, their products and services, but they understand how companies use those to better serve their customers. The next level up, strategic advisor, strategic contributor, you're understanding how this will help them be more competitive within their industry. And at the highest level, trusted partner, you not only understand their customer, the customer's customer, their competitive position within their industry, but you understand their internal workings, and I might even go so far as to say the internal politics, which is a very high level of play, a very high level of relationship. So if you put these two together, you get what we call the sales relationship process, or the SRP matrix. And again, you see the 5 levels of relationship on the vertical axis, the 4 levels of sales process implementation on the horizontal axis. This is really a more framed up, formal version of that conceptual representation we had earlier. And the question, of course, is, where are you? Where is your organization on the matrix today? And so I'll just take a moment to think about that. And then the second question is that where you need to be 2 to 3 years from now? And when we ask sales execs about this over and over again, the answer is no. We need to be moving over and up in the matrix. And so what that looks like, and here are the latest figures from the 2016 Sales Performance Optimization Study that was released earlier this month. You'll see about a quarter of firms are down at performance level 1, 44% of firms are at performance level 2, and I'll tell you the metrics we use to define these in just a second. And then the remaining 30% are at performance level 3. So what I was saying a moment ago is when we talk to sales execs and sales ops, they sort of see themselves down here sort of in the lower left, maybe between the level 1 and level 2 interface, and needing to get further over and up sort of the upper right-hand quadrant, more the level 2 to level 3 interface, or maybe even fully into performance level 3. Now, think about that for a minute. You're down here in the lower left, and you need to get up there, sort of upper right. The question I ask is, will all the people you have on board today make that transition? And the answer is no. Some can't, some won't, some don't want to. It's not the Army they signed up for. If you think about moving up and over, would you be hiring the same kinds of people 2 to 3 years from now? Would you be training, equipping, supporting them in the same ways? The answer to all of those questions typically comes back no, because there are all these other changes that are taking place. So that's the latest distribution. Joe, I'm going to take a breath right here. I've been kind of prattling on. I was wondering, given your CX experience, maybe you have a couple of observations, and then I'll dive into the data.
Thanks, Barry. Inside of all the different organizations that I work with, the question then becomes, just as you've outlined, how do I go from the lower left to the upper right? And it is so much about an individual seller's desire to immerse themselves fully in their customer's business. It goes beyond intellectual curiosity, and it really is, do you know the nomenclature? Do you know the words? Do you understand the KPIs? Are you in a position to have a point of view? And I think how you earn the right to have that point of view is by kind of fully committing and, devoting your time to all aspects of their business, and tend to think in terms of outcomes first and work backwards. So I think it's really accurately categorized here, and I think you can be very good in each of the three levels, but to get to the third level, I think you actually have to know your customer's business as well as they do, and then you can bring your experiences to offer additional points of view that truly become a trusted partner then in a very dynamic way.
Absolutely. There are two things that, the market is asking all the time. One is, what do you know about me? What do you know about me? What do you know about our business? And the second question is, what value do you add? And when you've got informed, intelligent answers to those two questions, then a lot of people are going to want to hear from you. I'll just point out there are a couple of grayed out cells here. We call them no-fly zones. We don't see in the data organizations that operate in random fashion being perceived by buyers as trusted partners. One of the things that we always point out is if you're operating in random process, it doesn't mean you're unsuccessful. It means you're unpredictable. So when things are going great, everything's great. When the phone stops ringing, nobody has a clue about what happened. And then everybody starts running around asking, what's changed? Hey, it's way too late. The other one that's kind of interesting is over in the bottom right-hand corner, dynamic process. If companies have implemented sales process to level 4 dynamic process level, there seems to be this aerodynamic uplift that they're perceived at least the preferred supplier level. So I think they probably have demonstrated and exhibit a lot of that, involvement beyond intellectual curiosity that you're talking about, Joe. So here's the data. Just so you don't think this is, like a pet theory or, a favorite, kind of thing that we're trotting out here. We've been now tracking this for nearly a decade, and the data are completely consistent that as you move over and up, things get better. And I mentioned there are 4 metrics that we use to define the 3 process levels, and here they are. The percentage of reps meeting or beating quota, you can see ranges from 50 to 58 to 63%. The percentage of company plan attainment, revenue attainment for the year, 80 versus 88%. The outcome of forecast deals, won, lost, no decision. And again, this is forecast, not pipeline. Forecast decisions, the line that really jumps out at, well, there are 2. In terms of winning, 43%, 47%, 51% won. So even at level 3, there's still plenty of headroom here to do better. But the line that really gets me here is the no decision line, second from the bottom. Look at this, 23, 24, 23. Almost 1 in 4, better than 1 in 5 deals that went through the entire sales cycle and were forecast to be won, resulted in no decision, is enormously expensive and costly in terms of resources, time, energy, and so on. And those costs, which are huge, pale in comparison to the opportunity cost of real deals that you did not identify and go after while you were dragging these along. So that's a real eye-opener. It's one that we keep an eye on every year. And finally, the last line, one where you don't want to be in the lead, is sales force turnover. This is a combination of both voluntary and involuntary. You can see it gets better as you move from left to right. So the data is completely consistent. I mentioned we've been doing this now, tracking it for 9 years. What we look at is the trend. You can see level 1 in red shrinking over several years, level 3 in green growing over that same period. Where it's the deepest was coming out of the Great Recession. Everybody got on board with sales process, and then you can see it sort of reversed 2012, 13, and 14. It headed back in the opposite direction. In our view, we wrote about this last year, we felt that everybody just became really complacent and leaning back rather than leaning in, and we saw a slight improvement, about a 10% improvement this year, so that's a good thing. So everybody knows there's a lot of change going on, the old line, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. That's only true in a static environment, which is certainly not where we're operating today. We're talking about, Joe will talk about, greater buyer expectations, more demanding buyers, a more complex buying process. People talk about the buyer's journey where, depending on what number you believe, 57, 60, 80, 92%, a lot of people say that much of it's done before they ever talk to a seller. I don't think that's exactly right, but there's no question that people have done their homework before they ever talk to a seller. They expect you to have done your homework before you show up. And it's all about change and this notion of growth. How do you get from lower left, upper right? And the number one key to improve performance is coaching. And there are 5 criteria, 5 tests for coaching or feedback to be meaningful. And they are very simply, number one, is it timely? Doing annual performance reviews, even semi-annual, quarterly, that's not going to change anybody's behavior. We need timely feedback on rep performance. Is it objective? Not, just one manager's opinion. We'll talk about that in a second. But is it really objective, accurate? And these last 2 are the ones that are most often missing. Is it relevant and individualized? All of these are key, and if any of these are missing, then you're just basically talking at somebody rather than coaching them. So, talked about the data. Let's jump into it. This is from our 2016 SPO. Look at this. 50%, 11, almost 12% of firms interviewed feel they need major redesign in their manager's ability to proactively identify which reps need additional coaching or mentoring, and another 39, almost 40% need improvement. So 1/2 of firms are saying we have to do better or we have to do majorly better at identifying reps that need help. But even the other half, the 41% saying they meet expectations, or the 9 or so percent that say that they exceed, where and how are they coaching? Okay, we know how to do it. We can identify the reps. This is my favorite quote that I've been using in every presentation in the last couple of months is Edward Deming, the father of the quality movement, said, without data, you're just another guy with an opinion. So this really gets to what is the importance of providing sales managers with timely, accurate performance metrics. Look at this. Almost 50% said it's mission critical, another 44%. So 90% basically said it's super important. And then when we ask, great, how are you doing on that? Over 41% say, yeah, we need real improvement here. So, and I would submit that the 50% who say they're doing adequate work in this area, I think that would still be worth inspecting as well. But nevertheless, everybody recognizes the importance of, timely, accurate metrics to give timely, accurate coaching. So we have this model that we've shown, sort of this round robin, starting with the right focus, the right team on the field, the right functions and prospects and so on. And so as you go around, it's iterative. When you get to the end, you get to start all over. But I started with the 3 M's of management maturity model, and Joe's going to talk about another 3 M's, which are managing, mentoring, and motivating.
Great. Thank you so much, Barry, for your insights. This is wonderful. Next to present, we're joined by Joe Fooster, Global Head of the Customer Experience Go-to-Market team at Oracle. Joe's responsible for driving the growth of Oracle Cloud's portfolio. Joe has over 25 years of experience in sales and senior leadership roles and has a proven track record of building and transforming cloud companies on a global basis. Joe, I'll pass it over to you to talk about designing sales organizations for success.
Thanks, Joanna. All right. Well, Barry, that was a great introduction and a walk through the subject matter for all of us. I want to bring it down now into building in a specific team and talk to the pressures that we see in the selling environment for everybody. And really the 3 things come to the top of the list, right? That everybody's product tends to get commoditized the more successful that it is, right? So differentiation is declining over time, and it's happening much quicker. That's our first issue, right? The second one is that this sort of environment leads to great cost pressures, and with the idea that everybody is looking for solutions that are basically plug and play, the complexity level of doing it right goes up. So we do both of these things with the fact that now the buyer or the customer is doing more work before they ever even talk to your sales teams, leads to really, quite frankly, a decrease in individual loyalty both between your customers and your partners, and that's an extremely challenging environment to be working in. We take that a step forward, And we just look at the numbers for last year, and we see that it was perhaps the worst attainment in revenue plans over the last 5 years. And well over half, almost 60% of sales representatives aren't making their quota. So something has got to be done. But when we look at some of the root causes on the systematic side, as Barry was talking about, how important it is for the sales managers and the sales leadership to have confidence in their decision making, and then we turn around and we ask them and we find out, right, 1/3 of them don't actually trust all the information they have at their fingertips, right? So they wind up relying on instincts to design territories and quotas and incentive decisions. And they're still using spreadsheets in all of this. And when we put it together, that's not taking any step forward. So this is something that we have to work towards to move forward, because in essence, morale drops in teams. Teams start to think of cronyism and favoritism, right? Reps start spending more time on non-selling activities to figure out what are their sales efforts going to lead to, how do they calculate what they think it's worth. Then you start into a question about what does the company think that it's worth, and then there's a discrepancy. And on top of it, all times when we find problems in these organizations, what we find is that the incentive plans are not aligned with the business goals to drive the desired results. So to summarize this portion of the challenge, it's a combination of a lack of confidence with inconsistent behavior, uneven performance against individuals or across teams, and limited insight at the decision maker level to go ahead and affect change. Hence we get to my 3 M's. When you're thinking about designing a sales organization for success, the 3 M's that we like to think about is how do I manage to better performance and actually play a full contact game here around that, right? The second one is how do I motivate better behaviors systematically and consistently? And thirdly, how do I take the best practices, align them with the business goals and results to mentor it across the sales team? We think the areas that you need to focus on first and foremost start at the territory level, then they move off to the coaching level, and then they get into the incentive level. And as I talk about the territory level, the reason we like to start here, and it's so important, is as I build a team, I want to make sure that every territory can support an A player. I'm not interested in having a team with B players and C players, so I need to make sure that all of my territories highlight the opportunity to bring an A player on board. And so you start to think and answer the questions right up front about revenue growth and objectives, about the different segments of whether I'm looking at in my install base or net new or greenfield opportunities, that I set my quotas based on objective market data and potential accounts and not what appears to be either historical or colloquial types of ideas. And then finally, I have to think about what each rep is capable of and what kind of coverage they can provide and how we capture in the territory. And doing this in a structured format gives me the opportunity to build my sales territories so that I can hire an A player to each territory, right? The second component then winds up being around incentives. And so I want to make sure that what my reps do is in line with the goals for the business. And I need to be thinking about how to align what I want them to do with how they get paid. And when I get these two in alignment, I can get some very positive interactions, and I can make very quick changes and adjustments. Over 90% of all sales reps are motivated by financial compensation. That's not news to any of us. 2 out of 3 are motivated by positive internal recognition. A combination of those two really accelerates my plan. So I want to look at strategies that align these two together and get what's working best for my employees and best for my bottom line. If I've got that, then the next piece, and it's something that Barry talked about a lot, and I really liked what he had to say around coaching. But before I go there, I apologize. I wanted to mention just on gamification for a moment. Every one of us with our internal recognition likes to know what we get measured upon and what is something that we can point to that we're doing very well, and how do we actually get recognized for what we're doing very well, and keeping track of it in a fun and energetic way allows us to have a little back and forth, a little bit of camaraderie, and it winds up being something that's sustainable. We can all celebrate a big deal and a check that somebody might earn on something, but over time we tend to pay attention to who's on the leaderboard. who's doing the right activities? How do we do more of the right activities? And what's that little extra that I need, perhaps to stay late or to come early, to make sure I move up on the leaderboard, it's visible to my peers, and that is the recognition that continues to work. This idea of gamifying these systems proves that at all levels of competence and all the levels of my selling teams has value, big value, and it's not always purely, obviously, financial. Now I come towards the coaching, and this is what Barry was saying earlier that made so much sense to me, right? It needed to be timely, objective, and accurate. It had to be relevant, and it had to be individualized. That actually talks about a thorough, thoughtful consideration and approach to doing it. And one of the biggest impediments to coaching a sales team is to actually set aside time, think about the art of coaching, incorporate what Barry was saying, and then find a way to model those practices of your best reps that are working across all different levels of your team and codify it and get it into a system and then have a systematic, routine discussion across this, right? Highlighting things that people are missing, highlighting things that people are doing very, very well, and then sharing it. The whole purpose around this idea of coaching is that it's the third leg of the stool. I need to have the territory right, I need to have the financial incentives and the non-financial incentives correct, but then I need to bring the coaching to manage proactively to get the most out of each person. And that is not to say that we coach everybody the same. We coach them for what they need, but it's systematic and we have a plan. When we put those together, what we'll see is all sorts of examples of people that are facing similar challenges to what you may be seeing, getting an increased number of benefits and a whole host of business results, where they're actually using something with a cloud-based solution here tied to my legacy systems and tied to my financial systems for payroll. And by bringing these all together, I wind up getting a higher performance across the board, across all levels of my sales team. And that can be very powerful stuff. As we look going forward, we see that companies that don't actually think about aligning around all three areas of territories, of incentives, and in coaching, those that fail to optimize this leave potential revenue behind of 4 to 11% on the table. And for any of us leading sales teams, an automatic growth that I could pick up from 4 to 11% sounds very exciting, actually. So I want to take us across that page. We think of integrating your existing systems, your cloud systems, and your incentive and payment systems into one area where I manage the best performance, I motivate the best behaviors, and I mentor the best practices through coaching as the way to go forward. So, Joanna, let me pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Joe, for taking us through that. Now we'll open it up for some questions that we have coming through here, and feel free to type in any questions you may have in the available box. Looks like we have our first question here for Barry. Barry, what about a rep that isn't interested in being coached?
Yeah, well, that's a problem. And I think there are two parts to that. One is this goes back to not having data. If managers, really believe in coaching, want to sit down with a rep and say, look, you're doing a great job, but there's always more available. If you don't have data, then we're back to Edwards Deming. You're just another guy with an opinion, and as a rep, I may not share that opinion. So, first of all, arming managers with actual analytics so that they can have a meaningful conversation is number one. Number two, often the folks who aren't interested in coaching are, top performers, or called rainmakers. Everybody's familiar with that term. And one of the things that I've heard and had validated by CSOs is a rep saying, this coaching stuff, that sounds great. That sounds great. I'll tell you what. When I don't make my number, let's talk. And there are two problems with that. One is you're basically being held hostage by this rep. The other is, by the time this individual does not make his or her number, it's too late. When I don't make my number, let's talk, it's too late, because by then you've already missed the mark. And so top performers, as opposed to, rainmakers, getting lumped into the same way. That would be like, who did we just have? Peyton Manning saying, I don't want you to watch me practice. You know, we built a whole franchise around this guy. The top performers want feedback. They want coaching. They want to grow. And if you have someone who's not interested in that, that to me is you know, a red flag that should not be ignored. And they may not be up for it, but if they're not going to go for it, I think you need to think about moving that person out, or at least isolating the amount of damage they could do when they take themselves out. Joe, maybe you have some ideas on that.
Well, I think you just bring along the one key concept here is that actually, with the right amount of data, anyone will take some coaching. If you're coming to people with an opinion or a point of view based on something you saw but you can't back it up, it's easy for people to decline in interest. But if you can bring cold, hard facts into the discussion, I find even those that are hardened have some sort of fear of missing out on something new that's going on, and you want to bring them something new, and you back it up with data. I think you're dead on, Barry. You've got a chance then to actually coach them, and if at that point they're still non-receptive, I'm of the same mind that it's time to find a place to go send them.
Yeah, it's time to free up their future. Actually, you raised a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that. One of the worst things is, you know, where most sales managers come from is from their own experience when they were successful reps. And a lot of times managers, their coaching will be, well, you know, let me tell you how I used to do this, or let me tell you, you know, what I used to do that was very successful. And, you know, that might have been 3 or 4 or 8 or 10 years ago. And, man, that is like ancient history. So, you know, let's deal with the current reality, not, you know, whatever was happening, you know, when you were a sales rep. So, yeah, I think that's really an important point to make.
Great. Yeah, those are good points. We have time for one more question here, and it looks like it's coming for Joe. And this is a good one to leave off on, and we'll get to the rest of the questions. We'll reach out to you personally. But, Joe, you've covered a lot of what sales leaders can do with sales performance management today. Any predictions for the next couple of years?
Yes, first and foremost, with the volume of data that's getting pushed out to that smartphone, I think what we have to do is be thinking all the time about using these analytics to come with insights. Our customers will always take a meeting with us if we're bringing them an insight. An executive that we're talking to is interested in an insight. So if our guys are only showing up, if our gals are only showing up with what they already know, sort of reporting the facts rather than bringing the insight, I think they're of lower value. So as people have more and more data that's capable of being pushed as insights to a smartphone, then I think what we're going to see in the future is that sales cycles are going to be insight-led about changes that you can help make, as opposed to reactions about a plan that the customer wants to put in place and you're there to help facilitate it. I think the burden is going to actually become less and less on responding and more on bringing an insight, bringing an idea, and then creating value out of the ecosystem that you and the customer both participate in.
Yeah. You know, I'd like to add something, maybe 2 things to that. When you talk about the data that's streaming into these smartphones today, which is, you know, compelling, a great thing to keep in mind. Once is an incident, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a trend. What executives are looking for is, where are these things heading? What trends can you tell me? What things are you seeing because you're out in the marketplace calling on lots of companies? What are you seeing that maybe we're overlooking? And I think that, as you said, will always get you an audience. The other thing, absolutely a cautionary note here, but I'm interested in your thoughts on this as well, Joe. Because of all of the immediate access that's available on smartphones, in my view, pre-call planning has gone out the window. And a lot of folks, you'll see them in Pete's or in the elevator or Starbucks, you know, checking somebody on LinkedIn or looking something up in their mobile app before they go into a call. That is not pre-call planning. And that, in my view, is doing a real disservice. That is not showing up for the party.
Yeah, Barry, you nailed it again. I'm forever amazed for something as important as an executive sharing their time with you that you don't actually have some form of a written or scripted plan or the briefing document you're going to hand to the exec on your team that's joining you. It's a classic miss. And this idea that I can check a quick LinkedIn profile, or I can check quickly through a social collaboration 2 or 3 other similarities, that's nowhere near the depth you're going to need when you're actually there and you've got a chance with the decision maker to move something forward and you've under-prepped. It'd be like not training enough to go run the marathon and hitting the wall way too early. So I agree. Even though you have this plethora of data at your fingertips and you are supposed to lead with an insight, you really better have actually scripted out the whole thing with a couple of options along the way if things shift. And if you do, you'll be successful. And if not, you're going to fall back into the category of random, and quite frankly, you're not going to be performing at your highest level.
Great. Thank you both so much. We are out of time for today. If you've sent in a question, we'll be sure to get back to you personally after this webinar. Thank you again, Barry and Joe, for your time and your insights. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.